This is the disadvantage of having a weak party is that anybody who's going to will basically accept anybody who's willing to vote Republican, which is frustrating. And so we start bringing in these sort of extremist single issue groups, and what that does for the moderates is they start jumping ship. They either register independent or I am a member of a Republican group in Portland, and they lose members left and right, either because of Trump or because of the way that the party's moving. And these guys have the same thought that I did, is like, I don't know if I can be associated with this anymore, even though I believe all those, fiscally conservative values. So if we can, again, get some moderate leadership in to get a moderate following to start voting in county party elections and then in Oregon Republican Party elections, I think that's how you start changing things, and you start changing the view of the party away from, sort of the extreme right to a more moderate party. Because if you look at the majority of Oregon is not ideologically conservative, and so the fact that the Republican Party is dominated by the ideologically conservative people means it's not representative of the state, which also means that we don't win elections, and we end up in the super minority. So
actually you're touching on, there was one of the questions you also asked in that Alan Allen podcast, or actually he asked of you, I think, who's your favorite Republican in the state, in state politics? And as I was listening to that, I was like, mine would be Tom McCall.
Yeah.
And I think that, to your point, he was not an ideologue. He straddled, I think, every aspect of what we're talking about in this conversation. And he did a tremendous amount of good for the state.
Tom McCall, Vic Atiyeh, even Bob Packwood. Moderate Republicans.
Yeah. Vic Atiyeh, I think there were some indications that we were starting to move off of, and it's a very long story. I've kind of reviewed his legislative history or governance history as well, but I think we were starting to move that direction with Vic Atiyeh. I think we moved back a little bit, but then, obviously we started going Roberts, Kitzhaber, so that die was set. But the Tom McCall era, where it was non-ideological, we got a lot done, and that's what I'm hoping we can achieve in the state again. I do think that it's possible, but only if we can start to deconstruct, I think, some of the gerrymandering, and create a system where you're not incentivized to go further to the left, or further to the right, and that's what we have now. We are picking ideologues over pragmatists.
When you have these very red or very blue districts, the primary ends up being who is the most extreme. No one tries to. The fewer purple districts there are. It's a very good point. I was a big fan of IP57, the Independent Redistricting Council. It's really unfortunate that they couldn't get COVID happened, and all of a sudden you can't go collect signatures, and so what are you going to do?
Yeah. What was interesting, sorry, I didn't mean to talk over you, but one of the things that came up as I was pushing for that as well was, and this I think is just a really good case in point about how ideological we become. The most pushback I got was from the left saying, we won the election. We're going to do this, and no one's going to tell us not. So you can start to see how that digs in, and it becomes part of the psyche, and that actually, I think, opens the door to, you and I discussed a couple of potential speaking topics, and one of them was tribalism. And that's, I think, the end result of what we've come to. It's become so ideologically extreme that you look at it almost like a sporting event. This is the Seahawks versus the Niners or something. And these guys may be the best upstanding people outside of that game, and you're vilifying, you're calling them horrible names, you're calling their mom horrible names, and the thing is, that's kind of what we're seeing in politics as well. A lack of understanding about what people bring to the table, and how do we get past that tribalism. So I'm going to pose that question to you.
How do we get past tribalism? Yeah. Having conversations like this, meeting people who do not see eye to eye ideologically, and having a conversation with them face to face. And I know that's difficult in COVID, but I think as soon as that conversation got moved away from face to face and onto Facebook, it became a lot easier to be tribal. And there's another thing that Leader Drazen said, I think it was probably off the podcast, but we were talking about this. How do we bring more moderates into the party? And she's like, when we poll for how excited people are and so it's hard to get excited about moderate issues. And that's something that running as a moderate, I say that freely. Something that I've had a hard time with is where do you find to get people excited about an idea when your ideas are kind of in the middle? If you are an extremist and you can whip up that anger or that fear or those emotions on the polar ends, you get those people. Those are the people who are going to knock doors for you. Those are the people who are going to donate money. Those are the people who are going to volunteer for your campaign. They're going to make phone calls. It's tough to as a moderate, and it's become this zero sum where you have to win, and winning is all that matters. And then once you win, people have this entitlement of, well, I won, so I can do whatever I want. Mm-hmm. And I see that, you may not agree with this, but I see that with the state Democrats, and I see that with the federal Republicans. And you see that with the Neil Gorsuch Supreme Court nomination, and now the Amy Coney Barrett, where it was basically, we can do what we want. We won an election. We are able to do this. We are going to do it. And I see that with the state Democrats and cap and trade is, we won the election. It doesn't matter what the Republicans or anybody else thinks. We're going to do it anyway. So I don't know. I think in the short term, the answer is a more balanced legislature, both at state and federal level. One party controlling all three levels of the House, Senate, and governor, especially in a super majority, I think really kind of exacerbates that.
So would you support something akin to IP57? Let's say that the world turned to the opposite direction on November 3rd for you, and you did get elected, and I got elected. And would you support something like that?
Absolutely, absolutely, because it's ideologically, voters should pick their legislators. Legislators should not pick their voters. And Oregon doesn't. If you look at a map of Oregon and electoral, it doesn't look gerrymandered, and not like someplace like Maryland, where you've got this like weird snaky looking district. But if you think that 3 out of our 5 districts are a section of the Portland metro area, or congressional districts, you're like, oh, well, those are 3 very Democratic districts. The Pearl district is in the same district as Astoria. I mean, tell me how those guys are similar in geography or culture or anything. And I absolutely would be for that.
And then if you looked into the ranked choice voting approach, I would see that as being integral to fixing what currently ails us as well, in terms of turning a primary or a general into a discussion of the issues like we're having here, as opposed to having to tack to the right or to the left.
Yes, absolutely. I actually have a funny story about that. I was a delegate to the ORP platform convention a year and a half ago, and one of the things that we as a party, not we as I, but we as a party added to the platform was a statement against ranked choice voting. And I wanted to stand up in front of everybody and be like, what are you doing? It can't get any worse for us right now in the state of Oregon. Why, if we implemented ranked choice voting, the only way we can go is up. There is, we can't get any lower. At a minimum, okay, you don't like it. At a minimum, just stay silent on the issue. Why do we need to take an affirmative stance that we do not want to go for ranked choice voting? I was like, you guys are, I don't know. It was just a head scratcher. I have no idea why the majority voted to put that in the platform.
You never really did uncover the rationale for that then? Or?
Well, I asked them, the person who was a proponent of it, and she told me, well, she likes the way things are. She thinks that the way that we vote now is good, I guess. And I can almost see someone from a far right perspective seeing that as a way that the parties would have less power. And I think that that's one thing that, because you'd end up with more Green Party, you'd end up with more Libertarian, you would not have R&D. You'd have these other potential third parties that would actually get nominated. And so maybe to a party insider who wanted to maintain the party structure the way it is, I could see that being a thing. But again, like, things can't get much worse for the Republican Party in Oregon. Like,
but at the same time, I think that from what I see from the DPO, it's a similar reluctance to stand behind that, and that's why you have, I think, a justifiably vocal Pacific Green Party saying, this is what has to happen. We have a voice too, but our ideas are never heard. They never make it onto the party platform because we don't have the backing, we don't have the money. We can't break through the party politics to present our ideas and have them debated, and then showing up in our candidates and having them defended. And the ranked choice voting would, I think, really open that up. It gets you out of that in-group thinking, which is attached to party politics, and makes you open to the out-group. And that's where that tribalism starts to, I think, fall apart. And I would see ideas from the right, the left, the middle, far left, far right, suddenly becoming part of a mix that could propel our state. And again, going back to the Tom McCullough years, if we get past that ideology, we can do some special things in this state. We've done it before, but we've got to get past those things because it truly is tribal. It does feel, it feels like a sporting event. Only maybe football isn't it? Maybe it's
stakes
it's roller derby.
Stakes are much higher than that. So I mentioned I'm running a Facebook ad, and one of the things I've had commented a lot of times, because I drew a circle around my district, which is Southwest Portland, so a lot of Democrats are seeing this, and so a lot of the comments are pretty negative. But one of the things I've been told a number of times by people who see the ad is, you should change your party registration. Like, the Republican Party is so far, blah, 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 they're the party of Trump, you're enabling this guy. The whole party needs to be destroyed and rebuilt. And what you, random person on the internet, need to change your party registration. And you can't. And that's the reason why you can't. In this system, if you want to be influential, you need to pick a party. Even if I wanted to make a stand and register independent or register libertarian, those parties do not have the infrastructure, they don't have the voting base, they don't have you can never win an election as one of those unless you are independently have name ID, like Bernie Sanders. And even he, I think, was elected as a Democrat and then switched to independent. Didn't he?
I can't remember how that went, or if he was independent and then ran as a Democrat.
Well, he runs for president as a Democrat, but he's a senator as an independent.
Yes.
At least he was. Maybe he switched. I don't know. But
my understanding is he's still independent. Boy, now I'm embarrassed. Yeah.
Talking to one of my Democratic friends here, and he was frustrated with the Bernie Bros and the Bernie Revelation. He's like, this guy isn't even a Democrat. He's like, he runs as a Democrat every 4 years, but the other 3.5 years, he's an independent. He's not a Democrat. Like, get out of my primary. Go find somewhere else to go run for president.
And yet, the thing is, he overlaps, I think, with the majority of Democratic values. And you mentioned at the beginning of this, the percentages that you would say you're Republican versus Democrat versus independent. For me, I'm just north of 50% as a Democrat. That's why I decided to run as a Democrat, and also because of the increased support. It's not possible to move the needle here without having chosen either Republican or Democrat. But I think it's reasonable for a Democrat or Republican to have a mix. So you throw in about 10% Libertarian, because I do believe in personal responsibility. You throw in some Progressive Green, and you throw in the Republican pragmatist in there too, and you come up with a whole. I don't think that you have to be party pure to be an effective representative of that party, but you do have to, I think, tackle some of the power that the party has to guide that and to dictate it. And I think that that's where both of us are at in this situation.
Yeah. Well, we are right at about 40 minutes. We usually go about 45. Is there anything else you wanted to hit before we finish up?
No, I'll just tell you that there's some really good wineries while you're down here if you want to.
I might need to.
Yeah.
I don't get down here much.
No, I think we've covered everything that I was hoping we could, and I really do appreciate you coming down here.
Yeah, of course. I'm glad. Thanks for inviting me and being open to having this conversation. Like I said, I think this is how we bridge that gap, is by having these conversations with people who don't. Although I don't think we found a whole lot that we didn't agree on, except maybe the walkout. But I think that's the point. Is if you talk to somebody who, if you look at our resumes of, I'm a Republican and you're a Democrat, but when we actually sit down and talk, actually have more in common than we have not in common. And I think that people will start to realize that if they just speak to people and have the empathy and open-mindedness to speak to other people. Frustration with the Democrats, and that I know this happens on the other side too, but I see it from my perspective, is just a lot of unwillingness to engage. And especially in downtown Portland, where everybody's a Democrat. And again, I was talking about just the comments that I get on my Facebook page of people who just want to tear down the Republican Party and start over. I'm like, you guys have never voted Republican in your life. You probably have never spoken to a Republican. 63 million people voted for Donald Trump. I did not vote for Donald Trump. I voted for Hillary. But 63 million people voted for him. If you believe the Republican Party is evil and is out to destroy the country, are 63 million people evil? Or maybe there's something you're not quite understanding.
Yeah.
And maybe if you actually talk to a couple of these people, you would understand why they justified voting for Trump.
Frustration.
Yeah.
I think is really what it boils down to.
Frustration. I mean, there's a number of, and we can get into all the different reasons because I've talked to people about all of them, but there are reasons for voting the way you do that are, and if you stick to your own little bubble, you're going to paint everybody on the other side as whatever you choose to paint them as. And having conversations, I think, is the way to break out of that bubble and remain open-minded.
I agree. And I think that you and I are going to have some follow-on conversations after November 3rd as well. So.
I think so as well. All right. Well, I think with that, we're going to end the podcast. You already actually answered the question of who your favorite Republican is, Tom McCall. So I don't need to ask that anymore.
And yours?
So I said Abe Lincoln.
Okay.
And I think that part of the reason for that is he was the Republican who freed the slaves. And we're in such a racially charged environment now. I would love to see the Republican Party tack back to a place where we are the party that stands up for minorities and LGBT and women. And we could have a whole other podcast on this, but we don't make that effort anymore. And I don't believe that the Republican Party is racist in the sense, the way that the media kind of plays it out. But we definitely aren't making an effort to reach out to these people. And so that's kind of, we need to be more affirmative and make more conscious steps to reach out to those communities. And I think that was something that Abraham Lincoln, more than anyone else,
obviously, yes.
obviously kind of showed.
Excellent.
So
I support that.
thanks. All right, listeners, we will talk to you next time.